Life as We Know It with Tom Walton.
I have a book called Don't Know Much About History. I open it every now and then to remind myself how little I actually do know about the subject. But I'm hardly alone. Americans, especially young Americans, display a sometimes stunning ignorance of history. Events which helped shape our nation and the world we live in are of little concern or awareness to millions of them. Ask 100 people under the age of, say, 30 to describe the Holocaust, and I'll bet fewer than half can tell you about it. Many of them who recognize the term question whether it even happened. What about America's crowning technological achievement, the Apollo space program and Neil Armstrong's walk on the moon? I have more than anecdotal evidence on this one. I recently asked a young man to identify the first man on the moon, and he said Lance Armstrong. I guess he was half right. I didn't ask him about the mass suicides in Jonestown, Guyana, several years ago. I'm sure I would have gotten a blank stare. I will never forget the despair that I and the rest of the nation felt after the assassination of President Kennedy. Younger Americans concerned only with the now have no such feelings. Maybe that's good for them, but it's a chapter of our history they should understand. Consider, too, that babies born on September 11, 2001 are about to enter their senior year of high school. Most of them know the significance of 9/11 because of the coincidence of their birth on the same day. But to their classmates, the images of that terrible day are just pictures on a page. If you want to bring history a bit closer to home, let me mention with sorrow the greatest maritime disaster in the history of the Great Lakes, the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald on November 10, 1975. Lake freighters are a familiar sight in Toledo and important to the local economy, but the Fitzgerald was in a class by itself. Some might say the loss of life in that disaster, just 29 crewmen, is far less than the 1,500 who died when the Titanic sank back in 1912, as if a smaller death toll somehow justifies one's unfamiliarity with the Fitzgerald sinking. However, the Fitz was very much Toledo's ship, and the loss of the Queen of the Great Lakes and the 29 men who died should never be forgotten. It's not just history that so many Americans know little about. You could make the same argument about geography. If I ask you to name the 6 states which border Nebraska, could you do it without looking it up? I'll admit that's not an easy one. I'd be willing to bet, however, there are a lot of high school students who would also struggle to name the state which lies due north of South Dakota. Bad joke, I'm sorry. However, the number of geographically uninformed among us is staggering, I'm sure. I would guess it only gets worse if we start talking about the nations of Europe or South America. I hope I'm not guilty of a holier-than-thou diatribe here. After all, I would have a hard time pointing out Liechtenstein on a globe. We hear so much about math and science when we examine the state of education in this country. I wish educators spent as much time worrying about what got us here. Oh, and the 6 states bordering Nebraska: Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, and South Dakota. Next time you'll know.
Life as We Know It is written and hosted by Tom Walton and is a production of WGTE Public Media. Life as We Know It with Tom Walton can be heard on WGTE FM 91 every Monday afternoon during All Things Considered at 5:44 p.m. Or hear past episodes at wgte.org/life.